Welcome to Cancer Prevention and Cure, what you yourself can do. Hi, my name is Peter Strauss. I've been researching diet and health for 3.5 years now. The last 2.5 was in cancer only. The World Health Organization states that at least 1/3 of all cancers are preventable through diet. That raises the question, how exactly can our diet cause cancer? In this presentation, we will logically derive a clear understanding of the basics around cancer. In other words, a hypothesis on cancer basics. This hypothesis fits all the different types of facts and observations around cancer. It fits in very well with dietary treatment of other lifestyle diseases like diabetes type 2, heart disease, hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, atherosclerosis, and quite a few autoimmune diseases. This hypothesis provides clarity and insight on the dietary causation of our high cancer rates and the cancer rate variations that exist. This results in a clearer understanding of cancer prevention. This hypothesis raises hopes for a cure for some victims, as this opens up a simple, new, cheap, harmless cancer treatment pathway. In short, this way of looking at cancer removes much of the unnecessary confusion around this mysterious disease and puts more control of your health in your own hands. But before we develop this new understanding of cancer, first an overview of this presentation, followed by a short introduction to cancer before we build up our case. After the introduction, we will continue with prevention, in which we look at causating, mitigating, and contributing factors to cancers. This will lead us to a closer look at the relationship of proteins and cancer. Next, we will look at hormones and growth factors as a possible major drive behind cancer observations. We will look at how exogenous hormones, those extra hormones not produced by our own body, might be driving both extra human growth and high human cancer rates. We will finish this section by touching on the Bradford-Hill criteria that were also used to link smoking and lung cancer. After looking at cancer from a preventative perspective, we will look to see if the findings might support a cancer remission. Next, we will ask ourselves how we got here and what stops us from changing. Looking at cancer, we have significant geographical differences in both cancer types and rates, and also often significant changes in cancer rates over time. There will be more things we can learn from those facts. If we want to win the war on cancer, we must learn from those facts. My background is technical. I do fault finding. With something that affects so many people in such a dramatic way as cancer, we cannot give up fault finding. That leaves only one option, going back to the drawing board. However, we need to develop a new approach and leave the old assumptions behind. Otherwise, we will end up in the same spot again and stand there empty-handed once more. This presentation is in effect a fresh way of looking at cancer. Making assumptions might have stopped us from progressing. Making assumptions is bad science, of course. Australia has a leading role on the planet with our high cancer incidence rates. This makes cancer prevention and cure of great interest to most of us. Here's a graph of the total cancer mortality rates from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, and we can see that since 1982, the total cancer mortality rates have come down by maybe 10% over this 20-year period. Cancer is still our second most common killer. In 2010, there were 42,844 deaths due to cancer in Australia. The most common mortalities were from lung, bowel, prostate, breast, and pancreas. The chance to die from cancer was about 1 in 4 for men and 1 in 6 for women. Here's another graph from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare showing us an increase in breast cancer incidence rates over the years, reaching its maximum at about 2002. The incidence rate is the number of new breast cancer patients in 1 year per 100,000 women. Hence, between 1982 and 2002, we found more and more breast cancer. After this short introduction, we will continue with prevention. What is cancer? Cancer is uncontrolled growth, and it leads 20 to 30% of people in the high-income countries to their grave. What can we do ourselves in order to prevent and assist getting better? The authorities tell us diet plays a significant role in getting cancer, but how does it work? What exactly in the diet causes those high cancer rates we have? And if diet is such a big factor in getting cancer, wouldn't it make sense that it also might have some role in fighting the disease? What do we know about cancer? DNA, the genetic material, is damaged, and sometimes this allows the cells to divide limitless. This damage can happen by chance or through a carcinogen. We often don't know how it started. If by chance or through a carcinogen we end up with DNA damage, this can lead to a cancer cell. The cancer cell turns into a cancer growth, and this growth eventually will affect body functions, which can lead to death. Hopefully our specialists will make a difference, but the success rates for treating cancers is far from 100%. Today we will explore how we ourselves can influence this scenario. Let's list what we do know about cancer. As we already said, DNA damage is at the base of cancer growth. Cancer is more common as we get older. Here we see a graph illustrating our increased cancer risk with age. The age groups are listed on the horizontal axis. We see the risk going up very significantly as we get older. We know that our lifespans have increased a lot as well. Aging is associated with higher cancer rates, but association is not necessarily causation. Hence, as the lifespan goes up, the cancer rates go up too. We need to ask ourselves if there are any other plausible scenarios that can give us the same observations. Well, it could be that some of the changes in our industrialization process led to longer lifespans, while other changes in our industrialization process have led to more cancer. The main contributors to a longer lifespan that I've seen are hygiene, sanitation, immunization, and antibiotics. Living longer rather than causing the problem could be exposing us for longer to factors that increase cancer rates. With something as serious as cancer, this asks for exploring further. With something as serious as cancer, we need to find out. With something as serious as cancer, we cannot make assumptions. Too much suffering is dependent on finding the truth. At this stage, we do not know why, but cancer rates for most cancer types are much more common in the high-income countries. The cancers more prevalent in the high-income countries are called the affluent cancers. A few cancers are more common in the low-income countries. These are often linked to diseases. Let's have a look at breast cancer mortality, incidence and prevalence rates for some countries and also their life expectancies. Mortality is the number of people per 100,000 that die from breast cancer in 1 year. From the 5 countries here, Denmark has the highest breast cancer mortality rate. The Asian countries have about half or less of that mortality rate. Australia is somewhere in between. From the mortality rate, we move on to the incidence rate. Incidence is the number of people per 100,000 that are diagnosed with breast cancer in that year. The incidence rate is a measure of how hard we are looking for the disease. It's a measure of how hard we are fighting the disease. We see that Denmark finds a lot of breast cancer. They are fighting the disease very hard. The Asian countries again find less than a quarter of the breast cancer incident rates that are found in Denmark. Australia again is somewhere in between. From the incidence rate, we move on to the prevalence rate. Prevalence is the number of people that are alive and that have been diagnosed in the past with breast cancer. Finding more cancers, higher incidence rates, leads to more prevalence in the population. Mortality, when treatment has failed, leads to lower prevalence. Hence, the prevalence rate is a measure of the mixture of how hard we look and how successful we are at fighting the disease. We see that there are a lot of women walking around in Denmark that have been diagnosed with breast cancer in the past. The Asian countries again are much lower and Australia is somewhere in between. Interestingly, the current life expectancies in these countries are all in the same area and don't differ all that much. It can be noted from this table that the hardest fight against breast cancer is fought in Denmark, followed by Australia and Japan. Despite fighting harder, other countries like China and Vietnam appear to still have lower mortality rates. Hence, the high-income countries put a lot of effort in, which results in cutting losses, but it doesn't appear to lead to any real gains in the cancer battle. They actually still appear to be behind, as their mortality rates appear higher. What else do we know? A few cancers related to bacterial, viral, and sometimes parasitic infections are much more common in the low-income countries. This makes sense, as their hygiene and sanitation standards are still lower. Cancers appear to be significantly more common in the high-income countries. Cancer.org reports twice the cancer rate in the high-income countries compared to the low and middle-income countries. The high-income countries not only have more cancers than the low-income countries, they also have different cancers. At the bottom, there is a statement from the World Health Organization saying, cancer causing viral infections such as hepatitis B and C virus and the human papillomavirus are responsible for up to 20% of cancer deaths in low and middle-income countries. Some cancers, like breast and ovarian cancer, are strongly associated with some hormones. Later we will have a look to see which characteristic of hormones might cause this, and we will ask ourselves if perhaps most affluent cancers have a strong hormonal component. Cancer rates for the affluent cancers vary greatly across the world. For instance, in some areas of China, breast cancer in the 1970s occurred in less than half a woman per 100,000 per year, while in some Western countries there are over 100. This is a more than 200-fold difference in rates. There must be factors driving these differences. There must be something we can do better. Here we see that in China the highest cancer incidence rates are lung, stomach, liver and colon, while in Australia they are prostate, colon, breast and melanoma. Not only are the cancer rates different, also the cancer types are different. We need to understand what drives these differences. In the high-income countries, some cancer rates have been going up very steadily over the last 100 years or so, till about 1990, when they started to plateau out. Here is a graph of the 8 standardized Australian prostate cancer mortality rates over time, showing us a dramatic increase over the last 80 years. Over time, more and more people have been dying from prostate cancer. Just to be clear, the line at the top indicates the increased rate for 85-plus-year-olds. Hence, if you got to the age of 85 80 years ago, your chances to die from prostate cancer were perhaps 10% of what they are currently. We need to know what drives this change. Cancer Research UK reports that the melanoma mortality rates in the UK have gone up by 156% and the incidence rates by 360% since the early 1970s. Some cancers are linked to smoking, alcohol, asbestos, not good practices, but for most cancer types we do not understand what drives them. Cancer is more common in immune-compromised people. This is an interesting fact that we will get back to later on. We also know that sometimes spontaneous remissions can occur. These are currently not explained by our medical experts. People get better without our experts understanding why. However, this is what every cancer patient wants. We need to find out the factors that drive these spontaneous remissions. Dr. Kelly Turner did her PhD in spontaneous remissions. She researched 1,500 cases in the medical literature and she interviewed 250 patients, asking them only one question: what do you think contributed to you getting better? She wrote a book which she called Radical Remission, as she actually does not believe anymore in people spontaneously getting better from cancer. Just the existence of spontaneous remissions tells us that there is more to cancer than we currently understand. We need to revisit our understanding of cancer. In science, one needs to develop a hypothesis that includes all outliers, so one does not shortchange oneself. In the case of cancer, we need to come to an understanding that can explain higher cancer rates in immune-compromised people and also spontaneous remissions. If our cancer understanding does not include the outliers, that must mean that our understanding is incomplete. This sends us back to the drawing board. So how should we approach diseases like cancer? We've just seen that for most of the affluent cancers we do not know a cause. But looking at the fact that spontaneous remissions can occur, there must be factors that mitigate cancer. Or is it perhaps that removing the opposite is at work in spontaneous remissions? In other words, is it the removal of cancer contributing factors that leads to spontaneous remissions? Let's redraw our picture of cancer development, adding these two factors. Spontaneous remissions tell us there is other factors influencing the path from cancer cell through cancer growth and eventually death. We can call this influence or force a mitigating factor, as it mitigates the cancer outcome. We also considered that it might not be mitigating factors that create the spontaneous remission. It could be the removal of cancer contributing factors, factors that stimulate growth and amplify the cancer rates in populations. Or, of course, it could be that both mitigating and contributing factors are working together in spontaneous remissions. All we know at this stage is that mitigating and contributing factors must exist, as we can see their influence when spontaneous remissions occur. Next is to identify all cancer contributing and mitigating factors that we already know. We know some of them? Yes, of course we do. But let's start with the beginning. There is only two parties in the cancer battle. There is the body with its immune system, and there is the cancer growth. The body's immune system can be stimulated and suppressed, which are two cancer mitigating and contributing factors. By the same token, the cancer growth can be suppressed and stimulated to create another two mitigating and contributing factors. Because of the importance of this concept, let's do a quick recap. On the path from DNA damage to life-threatening cancer, we have only two parties, the body's immune system and the cancer growth. This leads us to four areas we need to explore in order to influence cancer development, from cell to a life-threatening tumor. Immune system suppression, immune system stimulation, cancer suppression and cancer stimulation. Let's have a closer look at immune system suppressants. Some medication suppresses the immune system, and also viruses can do this. Examples are the HIV or AIDS virus and some drugs. Both are indeed reported to noticeably increase cancer rates. Here's a quote from a study that says, "There is unequivocal evidence that the anti-cancer and immunosuppressive agents may cause de novo neoplasms," which means that there is no doubt that both anti-cancer and immunosuppressive drugs may cause new cancers to appear. Next, we will look at the immune system stimulation. The medical field has developed a variety of ways to stimulate our immune system to attack cancer. What we can do ourselves is live healthy, which means paying attention to nutrition and exercise. Our immune system has the so-called natural killer cells, or T cells, which can fight cancer. There is also something called apoptosis, or programmed cell death. Cells can commit suicide when they realize they're on the wrong track. They can sacrifice themselves for the greater common good. Supporting a healthy mind is another factor that cancer survivors often have in common, we learned from Dr. Kelly Turner. They might start doing yoga, meditate, and look for more social support. There is also research linking exercise to an improved immune system and better outcome when having cancer. Dr. Kelly Turner researched spontaneous remissions for her PhD. She looked at 1,500 cases described in the medical literature, and she interviewed about 250 people with just one question: what do you think helped you to get better? Stimulating our own body's immune system was a significant factor in Dr. Kelly Turner's findings. She actually does not believe they are spontaneous, which is why she called her book Radical Remission. She believes that changed behavior of people experiencing spontaneous remissions has a lot to do with getting better. Some things she noticed amongst cancer survivors: they radically changed their diet, normally more plant-based, they took control of their own health, they increased positive emotions, embraced social support, and found a strong reason to live. Next, we will look at cancer suppression. Cancer suppression can be surgery, chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and hormone therapy. Some of these methods can be pretty brutal, and they can cause DNA damage themselves. Some have severe side effects. Immunotherapy and cancer suppression are the only two areas out of the four that we are exploring here that appear to be utilized by our oncologists. For some types of cancer, there are successes using cancer suppression, but for many types, the success rates are not all that good. The last item we will look at is cancer stimulation. Stimulating cancer growth is obviously something we really would like to avoid. Here are 3 studies done on rats, in which the rats were given a carcinogen named aflatoxin, and then the cancer development was monitored while dietary protein was varied. In all 3 studies, they found that casein, the protein from cow's milk, strongly stimulated cancer growth, while plant proteins did not have this attribute. Dr. Colin Campbell states about his studies: "We found that we could turn on and off cancer by simply varying the protein levels in the food. Turning cancer on and off is a very clear outcome of the experiments." That was rats. Could something be similar happening in humans? Dr. Colin Campbell was also part of a group of researchers looking for the differences in affluent cancer rates in China in the early 1970s. They found only one factor that made a big difference. That was the amount of animal protein consumed. This was not only in heart disease, but also for most cancers. The China study is a great book to read. That raises questions. Would all animal proteins stimulate cancer growth? If not, which type of animal proteins stimulate cancer growth? And how would animal-based food lead to more cancers? Could it be that the extra animal proteins we get from consuming animals in the form of growth hormones and growth factors stimulate our cancer growth? Are some of the animal hormones we consume getting past our digestive system, just like oral hormonal medication gets past our digestive systems, just like, for instance, the contraceptive pill? Let's have a closer look at some factors that have been linked to cancer. Here is a quote from a researcher that states, "Experimental evidence indicates that the combination of growth hormone and insulin-like growth factor 1 provides an anti-apoptotic environment that may favor survival of genetically damaged cells." That means that apoptosis, which is one of our immune system's ways of fighting cancer, is slowed down or stopped through growth hormone and insulin-like growth factor 1. This is good news for cancer, but not good news for us. Here is a study that strongly links prolactin, another hormone, to breast and prostate cancer, and weakly to other cancers. This study on over 500,000 people found a strong link between prolactin and female breast cancer. Prolactin is used in mammalian bodies to enable milk production and stimulates some types of cells to grow that are needed for this. Interestingly, fish have prolactin as well. It is thought to be used to regulate the water-salt balance. Here is a study that links progesterone to breast cancer. Other studies again link breast cancer to melanoma. Once one has had one of these 2 cancers, one is more likely to get the other one. In my own 72-country cancer study, I found 16 different types of cancer clustering together. I called them the affluent cancers. Here's a study that links testosterone to both prostate and lung cancer. This also indicates that there might be a hormonal factor in lung cancer. There might be more to lung cancer than just smoking. Here is a study that links IGF-1 to cancers, especially breast cancer. Here is a study that links VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, to angiogenesis in cancer. Angiogenesis is the formation of new blood vessels. For the cancer to grow, it needs that new blood supply. If we could cut off the blood supply to our cancer, that would be great, not? Estrogen has been linked to breast cancer by many studies, including this one. The following question could be asked. What do all these hormones and growth factors that have been linked to increased cancer rates have in common? All these hormones and growth factors promote growth. For instance, estrogen promotes endometrial, uterine, vaginal wall, bone formation and puberty growth. Progesterone promotes growth of the endometrium, cervix and breasts. Testosterone promotes height growth and bone and muscle development. Prolactin promotes milk production and mammary gland enlargement. IGF-1 stimulates cell growth and proliferation. And the human growth hormone somatropin stimulates cell growth and IGF-1 production in our glands. It builds muscles and bones. Now, cancer is a growth too, of course, and these hormones and growth factors are likely to stimulate the cancer growth. So all these cancer-linked factors promote growth. In total, there are about 40 to 50 of these hormones and growth factors coming from the animal food we eat. The high-income countries eat the food of the rich. They eat a lot more animal products. Could that be the reason for our high cancer rates? Through consuming animals, we ingest extra hormones on top of what our bodies produce themselves. These extra growth factors could not only be responsible for making us taller, but also for giving us higher cancer rates. Some people think that the animal hormones are broken down and will not influence our own system. While that might be partially true, is that completely true? Isn't oral hormonal medication effective? There is the contraceptive pill, the abortion pill, and HRT, hormone replacement therapy. Don't we take these orally? Could some of these hormones from the food affect us? A bit more on estrogen. The World Health Organization has labeled this hormone as a class 1 human carcinogen. This means it's definitely carcinogenic. This is despite that no DNA damage has been linked to this hormone, and also despite that this naturally occurs in our own bodies. This tells us that we should be looking for another pathway than DNA damage for this hormone to result in higher cancer rates. The obvious factor is that it stimulates growth. Exploring other cancer development pathways apart from DNA damage is really the core of this presentation. We need other pathways, as DNA damage alone cannot explain all the observations that exist around cancer. Likely growth stimulants cause the cancer cells to divide faster, giving our immune system less chance to accomplish the already difficult task of fighting these cancer cells that look so much like our own body cells. How many different growth hormones and growth factors do the mammals we consume have again? About 40 to 50 different ones. Ladies and gentlemen, animal food is possibly a bit of a hormonal soup. Question: if cancer is indeed associated with growth factors in animal food, do we find associations between human growth and cancer, between animal food consumption and human growth, and cancer and animal food consumption? Let's first look at the cancer and growth association. Acromegaly is a disease of the pituitary gland, which results in the production of too many growth-promoting hormones. Acromegaly is also called giantism, as people become giants. Acromegaly has also been associated with more cancers. This study shows a cancer increase in acromegaly patients from 28% to 35% over 2 decades of the disease. As people are exposed to growth factors for longer, the chances to get cancer increase. Endometriosis is uterine lining cells growing outside of the uterus. It is extra growth. Endometriosis has been associated with increased risks of ovarian cancer in particular, but also non-Hodgkin lymphoma, brain tumors, cancers of adrenal glands, and also breast cancer. In the 1 million women study, they found that the relative risk for total cancers went up by 16% for every 10 centimeter increase in height. The risk increased for 15 out of 17 cancer sites that were assessed, including colon, rectum, melanoma, breast, endometrium, ovarian, kidney, brain, and non-Hodgkin lymphoma and leukemia. Here the Australian Bureau of Statistics reports that Australians are now taller than in the past. The average male height in the Netherlands has gained 20 centimeters over the last 150 years. Most populations in the Western world have been getting taller. As we've been getting taller, some of our cancer rates have been going up. Data from the World Health Organization shows us here that melanoma mortality rates for 9 countries have gone up between 1955 and 2005. Is that sun getting stronger, or are humans getting dimmer? I don't know about the sun getting stronger. We can also see an association in a static sense. Japan has the shortest people out of this list of countries, and it also has by far the lowest brain cancer mortality rates. Please note that the brain cancer mortality rates in Japan have tripled over the last 50 years. As we will see later, that their animal food consumption has gone up at the same time. Here we can see that as countries develop and get more cancers, their height is going up. People are getting taller at the same time. There's a definite association between populations getting taller and populations getting more of some cancers. Next, we will look for an animal food association and growth. Have we been eating more animal-based food as we've been growing taller? Here's a graph showing us an increased cheese consumption in the US from 1970 till 2012. Here's a graph showing us a 15% increase in dairy consumption in the US between 1975 and 2013. Here is cheese and yogurt consumption going up in Australia. Here is dairy consumption in Japan going up. Here is meat consumption going up in the US and also in Europe from 1961 till 2003. Here is the total daily meat consumption in the US from 1909 till 2007. 250 grams per day is over 90 kilograms per person per year. Here is the Japanese meat consumption going up over time. Note that Japan, with their lower cancer rates, eats only a fraction of the US meat consumption. Hence we can see that while people got taller, also their animal food consumption went up. Next we will look to see if there's an association between cancer and animal food consumption. As we saw, the China study came up with a definite link between animal protein consumption and cancers. The World Health Organization actually supports this for red meat. Following is a study I did myself in March 2015, which I called the 72 country cancer study. It was an attempt to combine the major exogenous growth factor sources and growth factor modulating factors from all cancers with a positive association with these exogenous growth factors. For 72 countries, I took all 8 standardized incident rates for these cancers from the World Health Organization's website listed on top of the slide and entered them into a spreadsheet. Next, I looked up their meat and dairy consumption per person per year and their cow's milk yield per cow per year, as all these 3 factors influence our hormone load coming from consuming these animals. Here is a list of cancers showing no particular association with animal food consumption. From the 11 cancer types listed here, the most common ones on the planet are cervical, stomach and liver cancer. All these have very strong associations with infections, which are considered the main cause for these cancers. Here is a list of the cancers with a positive association with the animal food. In brackets you will find association with other factors as well. All these cancers were added together, and I called them the affluent cancers. In total, there were 16 cancer groups with a positive association with the animal food and 11 with no definite association. Of the ones with a positive association, many had other associations as well, like smoking and alcohol or UV in case of melanoma. The other associations weaken the food connection, but it still might be measurable. Next, the data was normalized and put into a graph. On the horizontal axis, we have the countries. On the vertical axis, we see the normalized affluent cancer rates in blue, existing of the sum of the 16 out of 27 different cancer incident rates as used by that particular World Health Organization's website that was explored. The red line is the normalized estimated exogenous growth factor load. It consists of 1/3 of each of the 3 factors that are known to significantly increase our exogenous hormone load: meat consumption per person per year, dairy consumption per person per year, and milk yield per cow per year. The correlations are remarkable, and so are the differences between the affluent cancer rates in the high and the low animal consumption countries. There are other factors adding to this exogenous hormone load as well, of course, such as hormonal medication, egg and fish consumption, but their influences appear to be less significant as we consume less of them. Interestingly, the influence of medication appears to be bigger in studies taking place in more plant-based countries, like India, when compared to, for instance, Europe. This fits in with the animal growth hormone and growth factor hypothesis that we are following here. The exogenous growth factor levels in more plant-based countries like India are not as much swamped out by the exogenous growth factors coming from the food they consume as they eat more plant-based. This makes the influence of medicinal hormones on cancer rates much more visible. For example, influence on female cancers of contraceptive pill and the abortion pill appears to be much bigger in studies in India than in Europe. Hence, the inconsistent study results fit with our hypothesis. A few comments on cancer research. Commonly, cancer research divides cancers up into about 200 different groups and food into components like fats, proteins, fibers, etc. In the 72-country study, we unite many cancer types into affluent cancers, and we unite food components into animal and plant-based food, which we then combine with milk yield, as this factor 2 significantly increases exogenous hormone intake. Plants and animals both have hormones, but they are very different. Assuming that the source of proteins does not matter, like is commonly done in cancer and nutrition research, means assuming that plant or animal hormones do not matter. Assumptions are something we should avoid in science if we want to get to the truth. Making assumptions is actually bad science. Looking at detail only is also called reductionism. We struggle to build up a big cancer picture because through our reductionist approach, we cannot see the big picture that we're supposed to work towards. We struggle not to take the reductionist path because the big picture is somewhat complex, and also because we've been put on the wrong foot because of our beliefs. However, if everything else fails, as it has been in cancer research, we need to start fresh, and we really need to start with the big picture. Adding up the cancers linked to diet and adding the factors in hormone sources effectively reduces the noise that is unavoidable in epidemiology. That is why this method is the only one that gives definite results. When we do an experiment, we can control all factors in the experiment. In epidemiology, we do not have that luxury. An epidemiologist naturally works in a noisy environment. This has implications if we want to find out the animal's growth factor influence on cancer rates. The growth factor measurements are polluted by alcohol, smoking, asbestos, viruses, bacteria, parasites, and other carcinogenic factors. This noisy environment makes it more complex, as we have 200 cancer types possibly being influenced by 40 to 50 different growth factors. 200 cancers influenced by 40 to 50 growth factors is inherently a very noisy environment too, because of the combination of variations in ratios between different growth factors, in other words their composition, and variations in stimulation by different cancers to the different growth factors. Let's have a look at those factors that might influence both growth factor composition and the amount. The sources are meat, dairy, eggs, fish, seafood, and medication. The amounts and composition will be further modulated by farming practices like animal feed, animal medication, selective breeding, and the animal age when consumed. In the 72-country cancer study, I tried to grasp the three main factors: meat and dairy consumption, together with the milk yield variations achieved through selective breeding. Meat and dairy and the modulating factor milk yield are combined to increase the signal-to-noise ratio and reduce intermodulation distortion. Intermodulation distortion is caused by not all cancers being stimulated to the same degree by these 40 to 50 different growth factors. For instance, if we look at just meat, dairy and the other factors would create noise. They would create cancer rate variations on top of the variations we are trying to find coming from consuming different amounts of meat. If we looked at just dairy, meat and the other factors would create noise. They would create cancer variations on top of the variations we are trying to find coming from consuming different amounts of dairy. That is why they need to be combined. Combining gives us a much better signal-to-noise ratio and hence clearer results. Also, by using only the 16 cancers with a confirmed association with animal food, we increase the signal-to-noise ratio. At the same time, other carcinogenic factors coming from these cancers are somewhat weakened, as they are not consistent across all these particular cancers. Hence, researching cancer means reducing both independent variable noise and dependent variable noise. Hence, we end up combining growth factor sources and growth factor modulating factors, and also cancers associated with diet, leaving out the other cancers. We also need to maximize contrast. We need to look for geographical differences and differences over time. We need as many aspects as possible to get an accurate picture. We need to maximize data. We need big geographical areas and big populations. This will also reduce noise and improve accuracy of observations. That describes the approach taken in the 72-country cancer study. Let's summarize this section. We found associations between human growth and cancer, between cancer and animal food consumption, and also between animal food consumption and human growth. So the growth factors appear to drive more growth, which expresses itself as people growing taller, and also more people getting cancer. The word growth describes a specific process that we see happening. Let's recap the bigger picture we just looked at. For most affluent cancers, we do not have much of an explanation for their cause. We have some research linking smoking and alcohol to some of the affluent cancers, but we do not know the cause behind most of the high affluent cancer rates. We struggle to explain the rates changing over time, and we struggle to explain the geographical differences. We looked at mitigating factors and have seen a few things that we can do ourselves or we can get professional treatment for. The immune system can be stimulated by a good social life, good nutrition, and looking after the mind. We can stimulate the immune system by putting our bodies and minds in optimum shape. Also, our oncologist might recommend a type of immunotherapy for our cancer. We can suppress cancer by seeking conventional treatment, some of which unfortunately has severe side effects. We can also work to reduce the cancer contributing factors. These are cancer stimulators like growth hormones and growth factors. There are somewhere between 40 and 50 different types coming from the animal-based food we consume. Like the oral contraceptive pill, they might well influence our bodies and stimulate growth. We saw people consuming more animal food at the same time growing taller and also growing more cancers. We might not be taller nowadays because of better nutrition, but because of worse nutrition. we might be able to avoid immune suppressants like the AIDS virus through a healthy lifestyle. If we need immune suppressant medication after an organ transplant, for instance, then we do not have much choice, of course. Now we've split the factors that modulate cancer outcomes into 5 areas: the cause, the immune system stimulation, cancer suppression, cancer stimulation, and immune system suppression. The question could be asked, which factor has the biggest influence on cancer rates? Well, we've seen a 7-fold difference in affluent cancer rates between those countries on the planet eating a lot of animal food and those eating less. It would appear that a very big influence on cancer rates comes from the food. Dr. John McDougall and others keep on telling us that diet seriously influences our Western diseases. It looks like the animal's growth hormones and growth factors upset the balance between the cancer and the immune system, giving the cancer a much bigger chance to become a problem. It would appear that 6 out of 7, or 85% of cancer victims, could be saved by simply eating more plant-based. A further reduction is possible through becoming complete vegan and reducing alcohol and smoking. Some heavy smoking occurs in the section of the lower cancer rate in the graph of the 72-country cancer study. China, Japan, and also Vietnam smoke well above average per capita, but have significant lower affluent cancer rates still. Remember that lung cancer was actually included in the affluent cancer group, as it had a dietary factor to it. What about other factors, you may ask? Diagnostics and record-keeping differences between different countries undoubtedly cause differences in the quality and reliability of the data. Let's have a closer look at this. As we saw, the low-income countries measure lower affluent cancer rates. The question is, can we have some trust in this data? They also measure higher infection mortality rates, leaving less room for cancer mortality. Lower total cancer rates, leaving less room for affluent cancer mortality. Higher non-affluent cancer rates, leaving less room for affluent cancer mortality. All these other measurements actually support that their affluent cancer rates are indeed lower than those of the high-income countries. Also, migrant studies confirm that the first generation low-income country migrants have lower affluent cancer rates. Let's have a look at some of this data. The total cancer incidence minus melanoma reported by China and Vietnam are 55% and 43% respectively of the values reported by the USA. And we do know that they struggle a bit more with communicable diseases, which is confirmed by their higher childhood mortality rates. At the same time, China and Vietnam report a nearly 4-fold liver cancer incident rate compared to the USA and a 4 to 6-fold stomach cancer incident rates. Migrant studies tell us that the cancer incident patterns amongst the first-generation immigrants are nearly identical to those of the native country. So it doesn't look like diagnostics and record keeping are a significant part of the differences measured between the low-income and the high-income affluent cancer rates. The next factor we look at is living longer. We do get more cancer while living longer, but is more cancer really part of the aging process, or do we get more cancer later in life because we've been exposing ourselves for longer to carcinogens, some of which might be in the food? Here we see a table giving us the life expectancy at the age of 5, reducing the influence of childhood mortality. The table also gives us affluent cancer rates, which for Vietnam and China are only 1/3 to 1/4 of the Western rates. This is despite their above average smoking rates and lung cancer being included in the affluent cancer group. We already concluded that there is a significant validity in the data, as it is supported by other observations. We've also seen multiple studies supporting that there is a dietary factor in lung cancer. If we can get much lower affluent cancer rates while living just as long, then it looks much more like exposing ourselves to carcinogens is the major drive behind our high affluent cancer rates, rather than the act of getting older. Is genetics a major drive behind our high affluent cancer rates? Well, this being the case does not fit the Darwinian theory of survival of the fittest. Being a cancer patient definitely removes one from the fittest category. Also, the China study found big cancer rate differences in a genetically homogeneous population. Again, this does not support genetics being a major factor. Also, if we look at migrant countries like Australia, US and Canada, we see high affluent cancer rates in a very diverse population. Again, that does not support genetics being a major factor in cancers. The good news is that most of us are not really born to get cancer. The bad news is that we have to stop blaming our parents. Add to this that our specialists haven't come up with an explanation for our high affluent cancer rates, nor for cancer rate variations geographically and over time, and we will need to take responsibility ourselves if we want to change the odds. Is pollution a major factor behind cancers? Well, firstly, there are a lot of chemicals produced by mankind that have been linked to cancers. However, the chemical lifetime load we receive is still going up as we continue to produce new and more artificial chemicals in bigger quantities. At the same time, the cancer rates plateaued out about 25 years ago. This doesn't support that pollution is a major factor behind our high cancer rates. Secondly, if pollution were a major factor, we would see big differences in cancer rates between the industrialized polluted cities and rural areas. Again, studies do not support this, as in most countries the cancer differences between rural and urban areas are not significant. Thirdly, the China study was done in rural China and found enormous differences in cancer rates between different parts of China, sometimes up to 100-fold difference. Hence, big cancer rate differences were found looking at only rural areas. In the 1970s, when the study was done, rural China would have been relatively unpolluted. The China study does not support either that pollution is a big factor in cancers. While there will be some influence of pollution on cancer rates and people are very concerned, data shows that pollution's cancer role is actually not very prominent at all. Here we see an American cancer mortality graph. While pollution further accumulates in the environment, the total cancer rates appear to have peaked around 1990. It doesn't look like pollution is a major drive behind our high cancer rates. Is obesity a major drive behind our high cancer rates? There is no doubt that being overweight is less healthy, and that this is also associated with higher cancer rates. However, we know that not all correlations are causations. Here we see a graph from the Australian Institute for Health and Welfare showing us that in Australia the obesity rates have been going up since at least 1980, and we're still going up in 2008. In this graph from the same organisation, we see the combined cancer mortality rates coming down since 1994. If obesity were the real cause of cancer, obesity would not keep on rising for another 14 years, while the cancer rates steadily come down. While associated, obesity does not appear to be the cause of cancer. Rather than obesity causing cancer, it is more likely that a change to high caloric food has led to obesity, and a somewhat different change to eating more animal food causes us more cancers. Obesity is caused by increased sugar and fat consumption. We can learn from Michael Moss's book, Salt, Sugar, Fat, that both are addictive, and that these addictive properties are being exploited by the food manufacturers in order to increase sales. High cancer rates appear to be caused by the growth factors in animal foods. Animal food also contains more fats than the starchy food we're meant to eat. The higher fat content of animal food explains the existence of some association between obesity and cancer rates. The notion that being overweight is caused by eating too much and not exercising enough, and that this causes our health problems, detracts from the real cause. We are eating the wrong food. Food manufacturers try to spin the truth, blaming us for our obesity and detracting from the real cause, which is the effect of their products and marketing efforts. They make money at the cost of our health. In that respect, food manufacturers are no different to cigarette manufacturers. In their fight for a share of our stomachs, they are making our stomachs bigger. That concluded the prevention section of this presentation, in which we identified from many different viewpoints that the animal-based food likely is the major drive behind our high affluent cancer rates. Let's have a look at what this knowledge about prevention possibly could do for a cure. In June 1978, Dr. Satilaro was 47 and diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer, metastasized to his skull, shoulder, spine, sternum and ribs. Soon after, he was convinced by two hitchhikers to try the macrobiotic diet, which is basically brown rice and vegetables. He found it hard to believe that this would really make any difference, but he did not have anything to lose, nor did he have any alternatives. 3 years later, he had his 6th bone scan and was declared to be in remission. He wrote a book about his experiences called Recalled by Life. He died in 1989 after he reintroduced chicken and fish into his diet again, as he could not really believe that diet made such a difference. Like the casein stopping and starting cancers in the 3 rat studies we saw earlier, Dr. Tony Satilaro appears to have started, stopped and restarted cancer control through diet. In 1987, Dr. Jane Plant was diagnosed with breast cancer. Over the next 6 years, she had operations, 2 times chemotherapy and 2 times radiation therapy. In 1993, she had a lump on her shoulder of the size of half an egg and was told that the metastasized cancer would probably lead to her death in 2 months' time. She and her husband brainstormed and remembered seeing evidence that in the 1970s in rural China the breast cancer rates were extremely low. The major difference they could think of was dairy. Jane was already a vegetarian and now stopped all animal food. To everybody's surprise, the lump on her neck disappeared 6 weeks later, and she did well till 2011. At that stage, the cancer had returned. She realized that her diet had become a little slack, and she went back to a pure vegan diet. She also had some treatment. In 2015, she was doing well and in remission once more. Jane appears to have started, stopped, restarted and stopped again cancers through diet. She has repeated the rat studies on her own cancer. Jane has done lots of cancer research, has written many a book on the subject, and her breast cancer story can be read in her book, Your Life in Your Hands. Spontaneous remissions are often linked to plant-based diets. The rice-based macrobiotic diet in particular has lots of stories around surviving cancer. The stories were collected in a book called Cancer Free, 30 who triumphed over cancer naturally. There are also stories from the McDougall diet, the Living Foods diet, and there is the Hallelujah diet and the Raw Food diet. All these are basically plant-based diets of sorts. They are all void of animal food. Dr. Dean Ornish and a group of researchers did a random controlled trial around prostate cancer, in which they used lifestyle changes to modulate the progression of this disease. The result was that after 1 year, none of the experimental group patients, but 6 control patients, underwent conventional treatment due to an increase in PSA levels and/or progression of the disease. The experimental group was eating plant-based. Dr. Kelly Turner identified eating more plant-based as one of the factors amongst cancer survivors. She has stated, if we want to win the war on cancer, we should learn from those that have already won. I reckon there's a lot of truth in that. Those people that experience spontaneous remissions have a story to tell. Dr. John Kelly, a GP in Ireland, read the China study and started to encourage cancer patients in his clinic to read this book themselves and to eat plant-based. He has written a book called Stop Feeding Your Cancer about his patients' experiences. He states, what happened far exceeded anything that I could have hoped for. Almost all of the patients began to feel considerably better within just a few weeks. It was as if their cancers had actually stopped growing. Astonishingly, my simple experiment appeared to be working. In my book, Stop Feeding Your Cancer, I describe some of the more dramatic cases that I've seen over the past 10 years. one could say that all of them behaved in the manner Colin Campbell might have predicted. Those patients that committed faithfully to the diet remained in good health, whilst those that were not compliant responded very much like the rats in his experiments. When there was animal protein in the diet, the cancer sped up, only to come back under control again as soon as a whole food plant-based diet was resumed. Summarizing this section on what lifestyle can do for a cure, we've come up with some real good arguments for eating plant-based. Interesting questions are, how did we get here, and what stops change? How come this animal with the biggest brain power got himself so tangled up in cancers and cannot work out how to get out of this self-constructed web? Let's have a look at processed foods. We know they are less healthy. We find them very tasteful. How come we eat processed foods actually? Well, we can eat processed foods because of our brains inventing them. We invented the processes to create sugar, etc. We invented the factories that churn out this food. We invented the money to pay for it. It is actually thanks to our human brain power that we have these unhealthy foods, isn't it? Next, let's have a look at animal food. We've just seen that from a cancer perspective, this is also less healthy. Most of us find animal food very tasteful. We eat animal food because we can. We outsmart them, trick them, trap them, hunt them. And with the weapons that we invented, we keep them in cages and pens. And we have invented animal husbandry. Again, it is thanks to our brain power that we eat animals, isn't it? We are a victim of our own brains. We do not like to hear that those foods we love are bad for us, and these emotions often guide our thinking. However, that's not a very scientific way of going about it. That's not a very honest way of going about it. We do not like to hear that we are a victim of our own brain power, as we like to think that this organ of ours is so special and sets us apart from the animal world. We are avoiding the ugly looks in the mirror, as we often prefer to stay in denial about the chaos our brains cause in our own lives and on the planet. However, if we want to face our issues, learn and progress, we might have to face that ugly look in the mirror. What stops change? What are our science centers, the universities and research institutions up to? Aren't they supposed to lead us in a scientific, unbiased way? Medical science and universities believe in omnivorism. I've called the belief of humans seeing ourselves as omnivores omnivorism. Omnivorism is not based on science, but it's based on historical and popularity reasons. It is based on wishful thinking. It is based on humans having been eating an omnivorous diet for more than 500,000 years. And it's also based on the majority of all populations eating omnivorous. However, while we are an omnivore from this relatively recent historical perspective, that doesn't mean we are omnivores from a health and longevity perspective. Also, while the majority is an omnivore, science is not a matter of popularity votes. Neither of them are scientific arguments. Plant and animal food are completely different in their composition, and that requires very different digestive processes and very different bodies to cope with the differences. Carnivores, for instance, produce their own vitamin C. Dogs' stomachs are 5 times as acidic as ours, so they can digest the meat and do not get sick from bacteria. Starvation aside, from a health perspective, omnivores do not exist. Animals are either meat eaters or plant eaters, which are totally very different foods requiring very different bodies to make use of it. We need to be scientific about it and measure health and longevity as functions of the ratio of plants to animal food in the diet. Science means observing and measuring. Science does not mean assuming that we're omnivores. Making assumptions is bad science. Our universities and research institutions often have seen government funding cut over the last decades. In order to continue with some research, they had to seek corporate funding. With corporate funding, corporate interests have snuck into the research area, and this has effectively killed independent research. The corporate world has a great financial interest in keeping the people eating processed and animal-based foods, as in the end the following industries will benefit: the meat industry, the dairy industry, fisheries, egg industry, the processed food industry, the health industry, and the pharmaceutical industry. This list is impressive, and the corruptive forces are really enormous. The universities and research institutions also appear to be caught up in this with their prestige, ego and pride. It's quite hard to realize and also to admit that what your favorite professor has taught you and what your mum and dad said was actually incorrect. Even more so if this happens to be your favorite food. This would shake the foundations of one's values and lead to enormous re-evaluation of everything one knows. Many of us do not want to face that fact. For a long time, Europeans assumed that the Earth was flat, even 1,000 to 2,000 years after the old Egyptians already had calculated the Earth's circumference. In other words, the old Egyptians already knew that the Earth was round. Omnivorism appears to be similar in that we've got this wrong, and we struggle to admit that we are wrong. Our universities do a good job training our doctors in acute issues, but when it comes to chronic diseases like cancer, our doctors are doctors in medicine and not in health. Hence, from a chronic disease perspective, our doctors end up being an extension of the pharmaceutical industry. What about dietitians? Again, if you are after health, these are not the people to go to, because of the corruption of dietary advice through the industries mentioned before. You may wish to have a look at Food, Health, Profits and Deceptions on YouTube for more details and references. That was our leading institutions. But what about ourselves? Well, we like to belong to the herd, and we like to follow tradition. It gives us comfort and security, and that's important to us. Hence, while the rest of the herd eats omnivorous, it's not easy to be different. We also have a very strong emotional bond to food. A hungry person is really driven by getting access to food. Also, eating for humans is often a very social event. The other thing we have is that we humans are in denial about brain damage. With that I mean that we are in denial about the damage we do to the animals using our brains. We are in denial about the damage we do to the earth using our brains. And we're also in denial about the damage we do to our health using our brains. Our brain doesn't want to look in the mirror, and it is scared of what it might discover. It is ashamed of how we treat animals, ashamed of how we treat each other, ashamed of how we treat the planet, and it is our brain that is also ashamed of how we treat our health. Because of this, our brain avoids the confrontation. The problem with that is that if we do not confront our demons, we cannot truly progress. Before we wind up, a few loose, short items. First, we will have a little look at modern dairy, next at cancer research, and lastly, we ask the question, should we be surprised? First, modern dairy. Estrogen levels have been found to be up to 33 times the natural levels in modern dairy. Progesterone levels have been found to be up to 8 to 10 times the natural levels. Modern dairy seems to be the biggest drive behind our high cancer rates. This is likely caused by the way we farm animals. We already mentioned that estrogen was labeled by the World Health Organization as a Class 1 human carcinogen. So what's wrong with dairy? Firstly, we are the only animal stealing milk from another animal, so we can continue this infantile habit into our adulthood. Milk past the age of 3 is actually unnatural. Secondly, we select the animals for a high milk yield. But what controls the milk yield? Hormones do. Hence, we select them for high hormone levels. Thirdly, we do not want to feed the animals and not get any milk in return. That would be inefficient. Hence, we milk them during pregnancy. Guess what? During pregnancy, hormone levels go up. Fourthly, the cow's milk is for the calf that needs to grow fast. It has a vastly different composition than human milk, which is meant for a relatively slow-growing animal. Calves need to be able to follow the herd for safety as soon as possible. Cow's milk naturally promotes much more growth than human milk. Dairy is just wrong from all aspects. We saw a graph before with the affluent cancer incidence rates, and the estimated exogenous hormone load coming from the fruit. Over 72 countries, these two lines showed remarkably the same pattern. However, here is some contrasting data from that very graph. While the graphs showed a close relationship between the intake of exogenous hormones through animal consumption in 72 countries, some surprising big differences appear to come from farming practices. These are reflected here in milk yield per cow per year. The affluent cancer rate differences between Greece and the Netherlands stood out with a nearly double rate of affluent cancers for a very similar meat and dairy consumption in the two countries. This supports that it is not just what we farm, but it is also how we farm that drives our cancer epidemic. Any factor that increases growth factor consumption, really. The milk yield association with the high affluent cancer rates shows us that our modern dairy is likely the biggest factor in our high cancer rates. Next, we will look at cancer research. Why hasn't that led us to what we've just seen? By 1970, cancer had become the second leading cause of death in the USA. In 1971, President Nixon signed the National Cancer Act, and a lot of money was thrown at the cancer problem. Here are some of the so-called Australian charities collecting money for cancer research. Looking at the number of different organisations, collecting money for cancer research in Australia must be good business. There is the Australian Cancer Research Foundation, Breast Cancer Research Foundation, Prostate Cancer Foundation of Australia, the National Breast Cancer Foundation, the Cancer Council, the Breast Cancer Network of Australia, Australian Prostate Cancer Research, Australian Breast Cancer Research, and many more. A lot of money is thrown at the cancer problem. How come suddenly a technician comes out of the woodwork coming up with a plausible answer for the cancer riddle, and these organizations did not, despite all the money and time they had to their disposal? The problem is the money. The money that Nixon and his followers put into cancer research would have mostly gone to private companies doing the research. Outsourcing has two negative effects. One is that one outsources expertise, and two is that one creates a financial bond. Outsourcing expertise means the information you get from the contractor will be biased by the contractor, as the contractor depends on you for a living, possibly for a future living, and sees you as a potential source for its growth. Hence, the expert information you get is biased. The financial bond you get with the contractor will suit your contractor well, as money is their primary focus. They do this for a living. However, for you, reducing cancer is the primary focus. You are not aligned at all. If we weren't talking about research, this would probably not matter, as we can easily measure performance and steer outcomes. In research, this is different, however, as the path by definition is new and there are no benchmarks. Telling you that we should stop fussing about cancer and just eat plants is simply not in any contractor researcher's interest. They will steer away from diets in their research, as diets would put them out of business. The contracted researchers might well recommend to find a cancer solution in medicines, as that is where there is more money to be made. What we need is truly independent research. Helping others through research is my passion. I tried to post a short, well-referenced story on breast cancer research on the American Cancer Society's website, but the moderator stopped it. You are only allowed to share your personal experiences, and you're not allowed to mention studies researchers have done. We are being herded, and our democracy is grossly distorted this way, as knowledge and education are controlled. We have the freedom to be manipulated. If you look at their long list of generous sponsors, you get the impression that the American society is run by the industry for the industry. It makes me wonder if human suffering actually means anything to them. I sent them a response email. Dear ACS, I thought the ACS was about research. From your website, research is at the heart of our mission. I thought I saw an invite to join the fight against cancer from the ACS. From your website, join the fight against cancer. I thought that perhaps prevention was on the ACS interest lists. From your web, a variety of factors affect cancer risk, many of them preventable. I thought the ACS was here to help people. From your website, How can we help you? I must have been on the wrong track. My apologies and thanks for the experience. I will try to make use of this experience in my future cancer presentations. Greetings, Peter. The word hypocritical comes to mind when I see this behavior of these sorts of organizations. What about studies like effects of milk and milk products consumption on cancer? A review. The article claims to be an extensive review. Indeed, they looked at lots of research. They looked at colon, breast, bladder, ovarian, prostate and liver cancer with respect to dairy. Well, our cancer-driving exogenous hormone levels will vary with the type of animal food, for instance dairy, meat, eggs, fish, the age of the animal when consumed, breeding practices like selecting for growth and milk yields, feeding practices, medication of animals, medication of humans, HRT, contraceptive pill. Looking at the effects of milk and milk products consumption on cancer, a review is like looking at the effects of Twinkies on tooth decay while ignoring the sales of Mars bars, sugar, sugary drinks, other candy bars, etc. It's a waste of time. It would be hard to find anything in such a noisy environment. This particular study looks at 6 cancer types individually. Adding them up would strengthen the signal, but that's not done. It associates colon, breast and ovarian cancer with more calcium, and next calcium with milk. That is being good by association and in reality a very big argument, as it is a very indirect association. That's certainly not scientific. In this study there are no China-wide studies exploring contrasts. There is no 72 country study grabbing 1/3 of the countries on the planet and approximately half of the planet's population trying to capture contrasts and the big picture. This is like looking down at the streets of London and reporting that you do not see any traffic lights. You need to look up to see the traffic lights. You need to look for contrast if you want to find something. In a flock of mountain sheep we will only find sheep. However, the mountains will be full of other animals as well, but one needs to open the eyes and look further. No interests are disclosed. This study tries to impress using heaps of small-scale studies. Using heaps of small-scale studies, avoiding contrast and looking in a noisy environment, you can easily find what you want. The study appears to have been created to support the dairy industry really. It appears to be a con job. Yes, they used heaps of studies, but that's like looking at heaps of ants and concluding that all animals are small. Indeed, if you avoid the whales, the elephants and such creatures, you could conclude that all animals are small. With difficulty we can find the Institute of Technologists publishing this study. From their website we can learn that the industry of food technologists offers a wide range of online promotional options designed to help you maximize the impact of your marketing dollar. A lot of marketing is dressed up as research to give it more authority. It is like more doctors smoke Camels than any other brand. It's pure deception. The smoke screen from the tobacco industry has blown over to the other industries years ago. Perhaps truth cannot be bought through money. Perhaps sometimes we need to stimulate idealism. Through its different focus it can lead to very different outcomes. It might be able to achieve outcomes that cannot be bought. Perhaps buying independent research is an oxymoron. Should we be surprised? Surprised about what? We will look at the surprise aspect from 4 different angles here: mitigating and contributing factors, hormones and cancer links, relationship, cancer and other chronic diseases, and other hormonal effects. Mitigating and contributing factors. We saw mitigating and contributing factors involved in cancer, but are mitigating and contributing factors specific to cancer? Well, not really. Even a common cold has mitigating and contributing factors involved. If on Monday morning an office worker enters the office sneezing and coughing, only 10 to 25% of the other workers will get sick over the next couple of weeks, while likely all of them were exposed to the virus. Again, the state of the immune system has a lot to do with this. Mitigating and contributing factors are not specific to cancers, and hence, no, we should not be surprised from this aspect. Hormones, growth and cancer links. The hormone cancer link we see everywhere, really. We already saw heaps of links between animal food consumption, cancer rates and human growth. We can also see the hormone cancer link in hormonal medication. This graph shows a 6.7% drop in breast cancer rates the year after a study published a definite link between breast cancer and HRT. It is estimated that about 65% of the women using HRT stopped taking it. The breast cancer rates dropped immediately by a whopping 6.7% when women went off HRT in masses. The year after, when no further women stopped taking HRT, there was indeed no further drop. This is a pretty strong correlation. We see the hormone cancer link influenced by our own hormone production. Orchidectomy, which is the removal of one or more testicles, has been linked to increased prostate cancer survival. Testicles produce testosterone. Oophorectomy, which is the removal of one or more ovaries, has been linked to less uterine, breast and ovarian cancers. The ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. Pregnancy has been linked to both melanoma increases and breast cancer increases. Both estrogen and progesterone levels go up during pregnancy. It has been noted that spontaneous breast cancer remissions tend to happen around menopause, when hormone levels naturally come down. Breast cancer rates go up steadily with age during a woman's lifetime till menopause. While still increasing after menopause, they increase much less. At menopause, of course, the hormone levels come down. While our own hormone production influences cancer rates, by far the biggest influence appears to come from consuming extra hormones, the exogenous hormones we consume. Let's have a look at cancer and other chronic diseases. These people are some of those that are advocating a plant-based diet for health in order to combat our chronic diseases. There have been great successes in undoing atherosclerosis, including heart disease, and also reverting diabetes type 2, and stopping some autoimmune diseases like MS, Crohn's and arthritis. If we can undo a disease through a more restricted diet, that really means that the cause of the problem must have come from the food that was removed from the diet. That is a very strong indicator for animal food and processed foods being the cause of many of our chronic diseases. We owe a lot to Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. John McDougall, Dr. Neil Barnard, Nathan Pritikin, the man that did the first heart disease reversals through diet, and also to Dr. Colin Campbell and Dr. Michael Greger and others. These people have been a very strong force in the plant-based health movement. Not only are these diseases stopped or reverted, also cholesterol comes down to healthy levels, and so does blood pressure. In most cases we do not need medication, we need to eat properly, as these wonderful gentlemen show us time and time again. Here is a picture of a coronary artery opening up after eating a low-fat plant-based diet for 32 months. The narrow, damaged section on the left is from before the diet change. The section on the right shows the same artery has opened up considerably and has become healthy again. It comes from Dr. Esselstyn. The reversal of atherosclerosis through diet alone can be dramatic, to say the least. So it looks like the animal's growth factors and growth hormones are the main drivers in our high cancer rates. From my own research, I agree with the doctors just mentioned that the animal's fats are probably the main driving force behind diabetes type 2, and also blood vessel diseases like coronary heart disease, strokes, and most types of dementia and aneurysms. From my own research, I also agree with the doctors just mentioned that the animal's proteins are probably the driving force behind Alzheimer's disease, most autoimmune diseases, and osteoporosis. With respect to the chronic diseases discussed here, cancer is no different, as at the same time diet will prevent and increase the chance to revert cancers. So no, we should not be surprised from the aspect of other chronic diseases. What do all these extra hormones from food and medication possibly do to us, apart from increasing cancers? Do animal hormones only cause increases in cancer rates? Well, no. There are other observations supporting that there are other effects as well. Most of these have already been associated with increased cancer rates. People grow taller nowadays. Women grow bigger breasts. Men grow breasts as well, men boobs. Later menopause, earlier menarche, hot flushes, endometriosis, morning sickness, infertility problems, PMT, and there will be more. Menarche, the time of first menstruation, has been coming down over the last 150 years from 17 to 19 years of age to currently around 12. This shortens childhood and brings forward sexual activities before the children are developmentally ready. In Falling Age of Puberty by Sandra Steingraber, it states that about half of all US girls show signs of breast development by the age of 10. So we find plenty of other possible effects of exogenous hormones from this perspective too. And we do not need to be surprised either about exogenous hormones driving higher cancer rates. A summary of what we've found so far. A low-fat, whole plant-based diet is what we've been designed for. It is based on starches with vegetables, pulses, some fruits, herbs, nuts, seeds and spices. A B12 supplement is all we need for optimum health. B12 we used to get from bacteria, but we miss out on that nowadays through our hygiene. This is our natural diet, and foods like animal-based food and processed foods are slowly poisoning us. If we eat a lot of them, they poison us fast. If we eat them in moderation, they poison us more slowly. Moderation kills more slowly. Moderation is suicide in slow motion. All evidence points towards the extra growth factors and growth hormones ingested through consuming animal-based food being the main drive of our high cancer rates. Next, we will summarize all this from the Bradford Hill criteria perspective. These criteria were first used to link smoking and lung cancer, and they are the basis of modern epidemiology. The Bradford Hill criteria view associations from 9 different aspects in order to establish some level of confidence in causation. These are strength of association, consistency of association, specificity of association, temporality, biological gradient, plausibility, coherence, experiment, and analogy. But let's first clearly define our hypothesis. Growth factors, including growth hormones from our food whose levels are modulated through farming practices, and also growth factors from medication, promote increased cancer rates in populations. First, strength of association. In the 72-country study, we found that the 16 types of affluent cancers were 7 times higher in populations consuming more animal-based food. Here is the visual for that. If we compare breast cancer rates in Europe with those of rural China in the early 1970s, we can find an up to 200-fold difference in rates. The China study itself quoted differences within China of 100 times on page 71 of the book. We find consistency between our affluent cancer rates and hormones, growth, animal food, hormonal medication, and also milk yield. As the hormone levels increase, so do some of our affluent cancer rates. As we grow taller, we get more affluent cancers. As we consume more animal food, we get higher affluent cancer rates. As we increase hormonal medication, we get higher rates of some affluent cancers. And as milk yield increases, we also get higher rates of some affluent cancers. I saw the latter studying UK statistics. When the meat increase stopped after the mad cow disease story, their dairy consumption did not increase either. However, the cancer rates kept on going up, but so did the milk yield. Next, we have specificity of association. Exogenous growth factors lead to extra growth, the interlinked growth in height and unwanted cancers. That's pretty specific, really. Temporality is the order in which our observations happen. The cause will have to precede the change in cancer rates. Here we see an increase in China of the animal food consumption in one study, while another study mentions that cancer mortality has been increasing rapidly over basically the same time period. It has been a common theme that as countries develop, their affluent cancer rates go up. I found evidence of this pattern in all 16 countries I looked at. Biological gradient or dose response. In our 72 country study, there was a definite dose response. Next criteria is plausibility. We also considered diagnostics and record keeping, longer lifespans, genetics, pollution, and obesity as possible causes of high cancer rates. The strongest association of cancers we found with growth factors. If we look at coherence with other observations, we see that cancer is best prevented and a cure supported by a low-fat, whole plant-based diet, which is coherent with observations around heart disease reversal, diabetes type 2 reversal, halting of some autoimmune diseases, hypertension, and hypercholesterolemia, as those diseases are also best prevented and a cure supported through a low-fat, whole plant-based diet. We also saw coherence with other observations around our own body's hormone production. As our body produces less hormones, cancer rates go down. We saw experimental reversals or changes looking at starting and stopping of cancers in rat experiments, remissions linked with plant-based diets like the macrobiotic living foods, McDougall diet and the raw diet. Dr. Kelly Turner found plant-based diets linked to remissions. Dr. John Kelly found plant-based diets linked to remissions. Analogy. All diseases are a battle between diseases causing and promoting factors and our body's own mitigating forces, our immune system. Cancer appears to be no different. Hence, likely 85% of cancers are attributable to our food. Modern dairy is likely the most carcinogenic food commonly consumed. Like the cigarette industry, the dairy industries and others are in denial and defending their income and interests and spreading misinformation, like that we need calcium from dairy for stronger bones and iron and proteins from meat for our health. We do not really need the extra calcium. We need to stop eating the animal food that acidifies our bodies. This acidification leaches out the calcium. So rather than trying to top up our calcium with dairy, we need to plug the hole where the calcium disappears. We can get enough iron and proteins from plants. Our breast milk has only about 1/3 of the proteins compared to cow's milk. We are a low protein species. Industrial interests have instilled incorrect concepts in our heads. We finish with a few references. A more detailed analysis using the Bradford-Hill criteria can be viewed on YouTube. It is called Affluent Cancers and Diet, Unraveling the Confusion. Here is a list of great sites to explore if you want to know more about our links between our affluent chronic diseases and diet. Here is a list of books you may wish to explore further. If we want to win the war on cancer, we might need to consider some wisdom attributed to Albert Einstein. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. Insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Only two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity. I'm not sure about the former. Benjamin Franklin said, "It's the first responsibility of every citizen to question authority. We need to question why our cancer authorities do not advocate a plant-based diet as it clearly promotes health." Stephen Covey, the man of the 7 habits, explained the difference between management and leadership as follows. Management is efficiency in climbing the ladder successfully. Leadership determines whether the ladder is leaning against the right wall. By the same token, mankind's cancer fighters are very busy climbing the ladders in order to reach the cancers in our bodies. The problem is that we have put these ladders against the wrong wall. Capitalism leads to high efficiencies and lots of business. However, from the perspectives of individuals or societies, capitalism doesn't necessarily lead to doing the right thing, nor does it lead to doing the things the most efficient way. Capitalism focuses on money, and hence the outcomes are invariably turnover and profits. From a society or individual's point of view, achieving efficiency or effectiveness might be vastly different. In health, more turnover means more cancer patients, and individuals and societies want less cancer patients, not? The right leadership for effectiveness and efficiency in health is lacking in our capital-centered world. But hey, we cannot let human suffering get in the way of a handsome profit, can we? Just ask the tobacco companies that are currently producing as many cigarettes as ever before, having increased the exports to the third world. Let's reduce this preventable suffering that is going on. It doesn't appear to be necessary. The biggest hurdle in the war on cancer is not the lack of money. It's the hurdle behind the eyes and between our two ears. It is our brain. Something to think about is the analogy with how we handle climate change. Like cancer, we appear to be herded towards corporate and individual financial interests rather than long-term population interests. The unnecessary cancer suffering caused by decision-making steering away from a scientific fair base to a financial unfair base is enormous. The unnecessary suffering that will be caused by climate change through these same forces will be many times bigger than the current yearly 8.2 million cancer deaths on the planet. There appears to be a need for reorganizing our societies if we want to stop the unnecessary suffering of people on the planet, both now and in the future. Wishing you the very best of health. I'm Peter Strauss.